Welcome back to the channel, and unbelievably, 2 times in 1 month, another video with Tomo.
Back again.
And also in real life as well. I don't. This is unbelievable, mate. This is unreal.
Look, I can touch Gordon. Gordon Ramsay's face is as beautiful in person as it is on the screen.
See?
Glad that's capturing it.
Heard it here first. Now, it is a bit of a special day because I was on Tomo's show, The Last Lap. We filmed a really good podcast. I think by the time this comes out, I don't think the podcast will be out just yet because I think I might be able to get it this turned around quite quickly. But regardless, I'll put a link to it at the very top of the description. So go check that out. It was a very, very fun episode. We also had, of course, Niran, who's, of course, does the show with Tomo. And we had a good little chin wag, as they say. But
Good little chat.
exactly. So yeah, definitely go check that out. I'll have it linked. And whenever it drops, you'll be able to watch it. But the reason why I wanted to kind of take this opportunity to finally do a video, actual face-to-face, because it's been a while. I wanted to talk about Ferrari, obviously, the off-season, lots of excitement for 2023, and kind of, it's been a bit of a quiet off-season, I think, but the big talking point has been Ferrari, obviously, Matteo Binotto, obviously, we talked about when he actually got announced that he left. But yeah, what I thought I wanted to talk about in this video is what Ferrari need to do to come back to actually start winning championships, because we've heard throughout the season in terms of some of the big issues and what we think might be the problem, but we wanted to basically go really quickly through about 4 or 5 things between us in terms of what Ferrari actually need to do to get back to being at the level of Mercedes last year, a Red Bull, in 2022, to properly not just like challenge for titles, but also win. So that's between the drivers, the car, the team, because it is a collective, and I don't think you can pinpoint it to just one thing. So the thing that I'm going to kick off is I want to talk to you about the culture of Ferrari. Now, the whole team principle shebang in terms of like, in the 14 principles in the past 8 years, that cannot be normal, surely, because when you look at the likes of, again, and we're comparing to Mercedes and Red Bull, you have leaders there that are not only integral to the team, but also part of the companies themselves. And so, do you think there's almost a fundamental issue in terms of Ferrari above the team principle that's perhaps putting a bit too much pressure on the team principle?
It's a revolving door policy, isn't it? And you look at other teams, you look at Renault, for example, they had Fred not that long ago. They had Cyril in, and then Cyril wasn't deemed good enough.
I miss Cyril, by the way, just off top, I miss Cyril.
Well, he's at Hyundai now, so maybe there's a career arc where they bring Hyundai into F1. That's what I'm hoping for anyway. But no, look, I think you look at Ferrari with their revolving door, you look at Renault with their revolving door. These are 2 teams that have consistently spoke above and have the resources above what they've actually gone on to achieve. And then you look at Red Bull, energy drink company coming in, they've kept with Christian that whole period. You look at Mercedes with Toto, where he's almost been at that team for, it's almost 10 years now, isn't it? Because he was at Williams beforehand. And there's a lot to be said in this sport of time and patience. And when you look at other sports, and you could argue this point about football, to some kind of extent, but I think it's easy to forget what the job of a team principal actually is, because they turn up, they get all the plaudits, they're the ones chatting to Sky Sports on the pit wall, but actually they're the ones who are responsible for managing the relationships and extracting the best out of every individual, and like you say, setting a company culture in place where all of these individuals, that's why you have a team like, I don't know, Force India, where they didn't have the budget, they didn't have necessarily the amount of personnel, but everyone was working towards the same end goal, clearly, in a harmonious way. You look at Ferrari, and there's such pressure, there's such expectation, there's such attachment. I'm sure from the majority of the personnel there, especially those who are Italian, they know how much that matters, how much that means for Ferrari to succeed and do well. And I just think that you don't have to go that far back in history. You look at the Schumacher era, when Ross Brawn and Jean Todt were there, and they clearly brought some kind of outside influence in terms of they weren't classic, especially Brawn, not a classic kind of, he'd been at, Benetton, wasn't he, I think?
Yeah, he was at Benetton as a designer. He was like the head of, their technical department.
Yeah, and they just brought a different perspective. Binotto is a Ferrari man through and through. He's been at that company for, since he graduated, for like 25 plus years.
Yeah.
And you just wonder that is something, because the thing is as well, I don't want to like, what's the whole term, like throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, you don't want to overcorrect, and because they have produced a very competitive car. They've won races, they've set a lot of pole positions. Like, there's clearly a lot of the recipe is there, but it's not all working together. The meal isn't great. They've got the ingredients, but the meal's not great.
For sure. And I think there's also two types of team principals, and I think it's very interesting that I don't think there's two types of team principals. There's one that not only is a team principal, but also kind of in charge of the company. Now, that's the likes of Toto Wolff, Christian Horner,
Yep.
even the likes of Jos Capito. So he's obviously, he also has a bit more push in terms of that department. And there are some team principals like the likes of Fred Vasseur or, obviously at McLaren, who's there? I forget his name. You absolutely love him. No, the actual
Andreas Seidel.
Andreas Seidel. I forgot Andreas Seidel's name. I'm sorry, Andrea.
Wow.
But Andreas Seidel,
Andreas.
he is not in charge of McLaren Racing. He's just on the ground. He is the team principal. And then Zach Brown is the actual, is actually in charge of McLaren Racing. So there's two types of team principals. And I don't think with Ferrari, there's only been team principals that have been in charge of the race team, and they don't have more influence about, at a board level. And
Because there's
always,
not one way of doing it, is there?
Exactly. There's not one. And I don't think that Ferrari can even have a team principal that will succeed if he doesn't have control at board level as well. Because the problem with Ferrari is that they are so controlled by the board, and obviously I think it's
John Elkann.
John Elkann and I think Wagner or something like that is.
Yeah, there's a few different people. Like Binotto wasn't the boss. He wasn't the boss like Toto was.
And that always, and in an environment where like Ferrari, that always brings in pressure because you're always answering to the board and you're at the mercy of what they believe. When you look at McLaren, for example, let's forget about the top two teams for a second. Zach Brown and Andrea Seidel have an immensely close relationship and cooperation together. Of course, Zach Brown is still Andrea's boss, but there's a very close there's a cohesion, there's a vision, and there isn't this kind of, you might be under pressure, you might be getting sacked, because that just invites more pressure. And in a team like Ferrari, I feel like pressure, the one thing they have plenty of is pressure. They have more pressure than any other team.
Yeah, comfortably.
And actually, another thing that I think really would help the culture of the team, and this is actually something I've thought for a while, I think that team might be a little bit too Italian. And what I mean by that is when you look at, say, the Ferrari of the past, I think like diversity within, in terms of cultural diversity within, especially Ferrari, I actually think it would be a lot better and better for the team. When you look at the Schumacher days, you had Jean Todt, a Frenchman who was actually in charge of the entire operation. You had Ross Brawn making all the big calls. Even the likes of Rory Byrne, who was designing the car, he was South African. You had Michael Schumacher, a German. So you had this kind of different perspectives, I feel, because I feel like diversity, and especially kind of national diversity, brings a kind of a different perspectives. And the problem with getting just Italians is that there is so much meaning for Ferrari, for Italy, and any person that's Italian. I feel like there's almost, in a way, I think they need to disconnect that. I think they need someone a little bit more clinical, perhaps. That, of course, Ferrari is always going to mean something, especially if you're the team principal. But the job has to be the most important. And sometimes I feel like the pressure of being Italian at Ferrari, I think it might be just a little bit too much.
Yeah, and I do wonder as well if there are parallels between Otmar's departure from Aston Martin and Binotto's departure, because it's been kind of rumoured that part of the reason Binotto decided to leave was because he didn't feel trust from the board above. And part of the reason Otmar left Aston Martin is because, Lawrence came in and said, like, your role's not going to be the same. You're basically going to be sharing this responsibility, whether it's with Mike Crack, whether it was someone else, I don't know. But, like, you do wonder that, you look at someone like Christian, you look at someone like Toto, the two most successful team principals of this generation, and they are the ones who are on top of that pyramid. They are the ones with, obviously, maybe Red Bull, it's a bit, you've got the Helmut Marko side. You've almost got like Red Bull Racing, and then you've got Red Bull, the kind of British, the Austrian side. I think there's a little bit of a disconnect there potentially, but ultimately Christian has been entrusted to be, right, whatever you say goes in terms of
he has the final say at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, Helmut, I'm thinking more from a driver point of view, maybe. I think that's like the drivers themselves, which, look, at the end of the day, the driver, it's kind of opposite to football in that regard. It's very easy to change your driver lineup because it's just two people versus changing everyone else in the back. Like those foundations need to be in place, and they need to be in place for long enough to be allowed to thrive. Like getting rid of Cyril Beatable from Renault, I don't even necessarily think that was a good decision. I thought Cyril was pretty good. I think he needed more time. I don't think you can.
And even Marcin Bydkowski was there for a season.
Yeah,
and he was out.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I think with Binotto, yes, I know I parroted this a lot, saying like, I think he would excel more in a more technical perspective, technical role at the team. But at the end of the day, like, I think keeping him over losing him entirely, I think would have been a better outcome, and just give him another year versus losing him entirely. The optimum for me would be to ask him to step back into a more technical role. That would have been my optimum. But also, and you've said this, and it's a good point, it's like, to expect him to take that would have been a lot.
That's a big emotionally, like, I know, I can't believe I need to
On a
remind
human
you.
level, yeah.
Exactly, these are people, like,
Yeah.
emotionally to be told, you're going to basically not going to be fired, but your job role is going to be,
Yeah.
you're going to go down in the company and we're going to get, you know, someone who we think actually will do your job. That's very difficult emotionally. So that's why I think, you know, partly why he stepped away or, you know, was pushed before. Because I don't think he trusted the people above. And I think that's the problem. There's almost like, you know, is Elkan the right person to create, is Elkan the right person to get the right team principle that will create the culture and the environment? Because Ferrari have the resources, they have the people, you know, they have the drivers, they have the money, they have everything that they need, but the culture needs to be right. Because when things get difficult, and they will because it's Ferrari, that's when the captain can steady the ship. And I think that because of all of that pressure, that's why Binotto wasn't able to, you know, he went with the image of not saying anything in public whatsoever. There was almost no accountability in public. Now, we don't know what was being said behind the scenes, but at the end of the day, whether he was kind of like pushing people behind the scenes a lot more and kind of, you know, calling people out, it wasn't working because they were still making mistakes by the end of the season. So what do you think in terms of culturally and team principle, what do you think needs to be done for Ferrari? Can they get, you know, can they get the management on the level of a Mercedes or Red Bull?
Yeah, that's the thing, because it's all well and good hiring individuals, and like Aston Martin are doing that at the minute. They've gone on a big hiring spree, hiring a lot of people who are proven in their roles. But like you say, it's not just about getting the right people on. It's about, you know, I'm sure with a lot of people watching have had this in jobs where, you know, if you don't feel trusted, if you don't feel, it's all well and good having a skill set, but it's also getting the most out of you, because every single component has to come together. Whether it's, you know, I don't know, a pit stop, the jackman not doing their job properly, versus someone in, you know, a CAD drawing slightly off, and then that causes a small issue. I mean,
The accounting department now.
literally, like there's so many more facets to it, and that's what I mean. This is the thing with Binotto and Ferrari in the place they are right now. So many of the things I think are in the right place, but we have to sort. And I know it's like beating a dead horse, but strategy is an issue. It's consistently an issue. And this is where it's just, I don't understand how this has been allowed to permeate for so long with no clear and obvious means of addressing it. Because you talk about company culture all you like, culture can be in a great place. You know, I think McLaren internal culture is pretty good from what I've heard, yet Russia, when Lando was leading, I thought that instance stunk of McLaren not being prepared and confident enough to give Lando the information he needed to succeed in that instance. And I think Ferrari, consistently, I don't know what it is. Do you need people, like you said, from outside who aren't attached to Ferrari from an emotional point of view to not feel that burden of pressure? I think maybe that is it.
I think that's a big thing, because at the moment of the team, I think Matteo Binotto he saw the culture at Ferrari, because obviously he's lived 28 years working at Ferrari, so he's seen all of it, and he saw the blame culture. I think he almost went a little bit too far.
Yeah.
But to me, I didn't see enough accountability. I mean, again, maybe there was accountability behind the scenes, but those results were not on the track. We didn't see that, you know, we didn't see those mistakes fixed across the season. I go back to Sao Paulo, changing Charles's tyres 3 times from a set of used back onto used. And then he actually said on the team radio, I thought he said we're putting on a pair of new tyres. So they got that wrong as well. And it's just these little things. So nothing was changed. And I feel like they do need to get someone a bit more detached, and also someone with a bit more power. Because if you're constantly scared of the board, if you're constantly scared, you know, not scared, but don't feel the confidence, I think they need perhaps someone who, almost someone that has a say on the board as well, so that they're part of the decision-making process of the entire company, perhaps, or, you know, Scuderia Ferrari. So I think all of those things combined, it's very difficult to actually find the people, but it's just, I want to see more accountability, not blaming and firing people, of course, but there has to be seeing the problem and fixing the problem and admitting it, because when you admit it actually kind of relieves a bit of pressure.
Of course.
We made a mistake, we're going to fix it.
And there's extremes, right? You don't have to go from one extreme to another. Like, I think that's somewhere I think Toto seems to get it quite right. Like, when Mercedes make a mistake, there seems to be this, not denial of it happening, but this acceptance that it happened, but it's not due to one person. Even if it was, like, literally down to one person, how were they allowed to make that? Like, there's other decisions that were made before that, in terms of training, in terms of support, blah, blah, blah. There was other decisions around that led to that thing happening. And I think that's a good line to kind of walk. But also I worry for Ferrari, and I think that ever increased level of pressure is there because they've got a driver like Charles Leclerc. I think when you've got, it wasn't working with Seb, and Kimi was towards the end of his career, Ferrari never quite delivered, I think, their end of the bargain to Seb. Also, Seb made his fair share of mistakes.
And also Arriva Bene as well. And I actually want to say something because there has been so much kind of post-Arriva Bene rhetoric that I've seen, maybe from Seb or Ferrari fans, where they say, bring back Arriva Bene. Arriva Bene was so much better, but he made just as many mistakes. He was the team principal. Like when you remember Hockenheim in 2018, he was the team principal that didn't move Kimi out of the way when Seb needed to come through. Kimi was not fighting for a title. Arriva Bene was also the team principal that didn't do the right thing in Monza and give Seb the toe. So Arriva Bene, like people talk about almost, bringing back, he did such a great job. He made the same mistakes. He put Seb in a position to fail at the end of the day, even if he supported Seb a little bit more, kind of than Kimi.
But this is the thing with Charles. He's such a good driver. Whether he's the complete package to go toe-to-toe with Max, I'm not 100% convinced. I think he's most of the way there, but he carries a lot of power as well. And there was a lot of reports about Binotto leaving that maybe Charles' camp as well had and that puts even more pressure on Ferrari. There's pressure enough with the Tifosi and the expectation of it being Ferrari.
Now you've got your number one driver, also kind of...
And understandably annoyed. Like, can you blame Charles for not having his trust wavered in this way where so consistently they've let him down? He's let himself down a couple of times. Imola, France, talk about that, fine. But you expect that of drivers. Team principals talk all the time. They'd rather a driver drive over the limit and than never be able to get there. That's part of being a driver, is that you make these mistakes and you know what, it happens and you move on. And you become a better driver for it. Everyone's done it. But when, from a team point of view, with all that personnel, minimum expectations, not doing 3 sets of tyres on a pit stop, it's stupid. And that's a concern as well, because there's that increase. Do they worry about, potentially losing Charles if they don't turn it around? How much? That pull of Ferrari is a thing, right? Everyone loves Ferrari. Everyone's a Ferrari fan. But that can only go so far.
Yeah. I mean, you can only run on vibes for so long until you kind of run out of them, to be fair.
Yeah.
I think also with Charles, actually, speaking of the drivers, because you mentioned a really good point. Charles seems like he's the number one, but I think there's going to be a very interesting point in terms of how close Carlos is going to be next year, because I'm not sure if Ferrari have the capability to run 2 number one drivers. I'm just not sure. And
does anyone?
I mean, I feel like, okay, maybe not, of course, maybe not everyone, but in terms of managing the egos and managing, at the moment, Mercedes kind of have 2 number ones. Now, what happens when Russell and Hamilton get closer? If it gets just a little bit more tense, Toto Wolff is going to be tested.
But can you have 2 number ones when you're fighting for a championship?
Only, as Mercedes found out, only if your car is much quicker than the rest. But the thing is, I actually trust Toto and even Christian to an extent to at least manage it a little bit better than Ferrari. And at the moment, I feel like, do you think that when the new team principal does come in, he almost needs to have the number one? Does Charles need to be the number one at the team? And how is Carlos Sainz going to react to that if he has a good start to 2023? Do you think they can continue running this kind of, 2-driver dynamic?
That's what I mean. It's the whole stop inventing from Carlos at Silverstone was a prime example of because Carlos is entitled to, he wants to back his side. He's not been a mile off Charles. I think he's been less consistent. But you look at actually their qualifying pace delta particularly, and second half of the season, Carlos was on par with Charles. I do think that he also, what I think is interesting about Carlos is that he's been at lots of different teams. He's been at Toro Rosso, he's been at Renault, he's been at McLaren, he's now at Ferrari. He's got this experience, and I think he's more prepared to, push his point, because he's coming from a more outside point of view. Charles has always been part of that Ferrari system, even Alfa Romeo. It was still, part of that Ferrari system. Carlos has that broader knowledge and experience, and I think that's part of the reason why he outscored Charles in 21, is because he's got that complete. I don't think he's as quick as Charles, no doubt, but as a total package, it's very difficult, I think, for anyone to come in and be sorry, Carlos, you're second driver.
The only thing about Carlos for me is that I feel like there's moments of a really good driver. He is smart. At the beginning of the season, it wasn't working. He was I remember even Bahrain, I was thinking, I'm seeing Max and Charles have this battle. Why is Carlos not right there to take advantage of it? And almost 2 versus 1, with Ferrari versus Red Bull, and he wasn't quite there. But even by the end of the season, as much as he did fix it, there were still races. I remember in Spa, he almost got overtaken by George Russell for the podium. In Singapore, he was totally anonymous, miles away from Leclerc's pace. And again, even though he has progressed, I'm not quite sure yet if he can still be that championship caliber driver up against Charles Leclerc.
Yeah, I guess.
And is that going to be at the detriment of the team?
That's the thing. It's not only, we're going to put this driver as second driver, first driver, whatever. It's how you communicate that, I suppose, as well. Because if someone walks in now, right, new team principal, whoever that is, calls Carlos for a meeting, right, you're second driver, this is in your contracts that you have to blah, 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 right? That's obviously going to put Carlos's back up. It's how you approach it. And I think there is, so many times we've seen mismanagement. There's been enough times top driver pairings have been mismanaged that it can't be easy to do, clearly. Toto said this about Nico and Lewis. He would never have chosen them two as a driver pair, and he inherited that pair.
Yeah, he wouldn't do that again, post-fact.
And understandably.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely... And it was quite interesting. Even when he managed Nico versus Lewis, I remember Spa 2014, when I think Nico kind of tagged the back of Lewis. Toto came out and said, you can't be making that mistake. And I remember he kind of admitted that it was Nico's fault. He wasn't scared to kind of say it to the media and kind of put his driver kind of on blast a little bit. So that, again, that's kind of, perhaps he's, learned from that, or maybe that's kind of what worked in the end. So it's all of these different kind of styles of management I think Ferrari are going to have to kind of get used to, whoever this new team principal is. But I just don't know if they'll be able to. I think if Charles Leclerc is a little bit clearer of Carlos Sainz early in the season, and we do have a title battle, it's all about how close Carlos is. And when Carlos does become, when you have to have that conversation with Carlos where the points just doesn't look good, you might have to just be a number 2 for a little bit, in certain decisions.
It's just like...
And you've got to back Charles. If that opportunity is there and they are in a title fight and there is a gap, you've got to back your team. You've got to back Charles, who's potentially going to be the one who wins it.
Yeah, he's the one who looks like he could go toe-to-toe with Max, more so than Carlos, 100%. The thing is as well, Ferrari are the most political team in Formula One. You've also got Carlos's camp and you've got Charles' camp. And I feel like, obviously Carlos is his dad who's present, and he's got I think it's his
brother.
His brother or cousin or something, who's his manager. Obviously you've got Charles' camp, who knows full well I think
the Sainz camp is very switched on and very... I think they do their job politically behind the scenes to kind of make sure that Carlos does have the power. He doesn't become the number 2, but ultimate speed, a number 1 driver is dictated by speed.
And this is the thing, this is why it was always going to be, you could argue, an impossible task for Binotto, because he's got to handle the drivers' camps, but then also he's not even the top dog. So he can't even rule it with an iron fist. I'm sure, with Christian, right? Max Verstappen's camp, and we saw his manager for the first time when Monaco, when all the Brazil stuff went down, right?
Yeah.
And it's like Max has obviously got his camp who is support. Checo's got his camp with Carlos Slim and all these people who support him, and it's like when you've then not got full control, like you say, which is so important, then that just makes that arguably an impossible job. So even a new team principal, is it actually going to change anything? That's
the problem. The whole Max and Checo's camp after Brazil, Christian Horner's the top dog. He's in charge of Red Bull Racing, he's in charge of the company, and he is the team principal. When you look at the likes of Sainz and Leclerc, and whoever, even whatever driver comes into Ferrari, they would have known, Matteo Binotto, he's the team principal, he's not the top dog. So I can just go to the Ferrari CEO, and I think that's why they know the likes of Leclerc. He knows that he has that power now. So I think it's very interesting also from the drivers. I don't think the drivers have also done a perfect job. I think, when you look at, again, both of them I think need to improve as well. Because when you look at Carlos, he needs to start the season. If he really is that guy, and I do think he does have the speed, he really needs to start the season on the front foot and needs to show that from the very beginning. From Bahrain 2023, he is on the level of Leclerc. And even Charles, I feel like I want to see more leadership from him, because even something, if I go back to Sao Paulo, and when he was sent out on the Inters, that obviously would have been a Ferrari and Leclerc decision. It would have been both. There's no doubt about it. And even though it was a mistake to keep going round, why did he not come in straight away? Why did he not go on the team radio and say, right, we're on the wrong tyre.
Yeah.
I am boxing now. We could still put the slicks on and still have a lap potentially. But he didn't. He carried on, he carried on round. And it was only, I think there is an onus on the driver as well.
Yeah.
And we see that from all of the greats where they can dictate the team and the strategy.
And look, sometimes they're wrong. And
Of course,
sometimes, but also, there's definitely a happy medium there where you don't just go with every single decision the team makes, because you have to trust your instincts as a driver. They are feeling things that the team can never possibly feel in all the amount of data they've got. Like, yeah, you're right. I think that's where Carlos does walk that line much more comfortably than Charles. I think he makes those correct decisions with his experience, with his understanding of F1. I think he makes those calls right more often than not. And we see this again. I think this is a praise I've got of George, actually. I think I've been quite impressed with George this year, how he has, asserted what he's wanted very firmly, more so than we've seen from Charles. I think that's part of what, that extra percent that Charles needs to really take it, because all the other greats will do that.
I mean, actually, talking about Max a little bit, I don't think Max takes charge too much of the strategy, because Red Bull get it right so many times. But when sometimes there's a bit... I think Lewis knows that sometimes my team can get it wrong. And I think George knows that as well.
Yeah.
And when you do have just that slightest doubt... That's not it's not a bad thing, of course. Not everyone has the best strategy like Red Bull. You can have doubts about your team whilst also trusting them. But that's why I think that Charles needs to get that in his kind of locker as well. And it's going to be very interesting. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, I suppose, in terms of getting Ferrari back to the top is the thing that every team needs, the car. Now, what I found quite interesting about Binotto's time, when I actually kind of went back on it, when you think about his time at Ferrari, funny enough, actually, I searched on Wikipedia. When you look at the SF90, he is both the team principal of that team and also head of the design office for the 2019 car, which I find is amazing. But so 2020 was the first, exactly the same as whoever comes into Ferrari now.
Yeah.
2023 is not going to be their year technically where they were in charge of everything. So Binotto's first year was in 2020. Whoever comes in now, their first year is going to be 2024, where they have an off season, everything to prepare, everything kind of going in their vision. And every single year, the car has got kind of under Binotto, it got better from 2020 to 2021 to 2022, and Ferrari now. The grass is not always greener. I mean, they had a race-winning car, the second best car on the grid. That does not come easy. Alpine and McLaren are gagging to be where Ferrari are right now.
And there's no guarantee of success. I mean, you look at how poor Ferrari were in 2020, how far off the pace they were. You look at how Mercedes have gone from dominating the hybrid era to we start this season and they're comfortably third. McLaren, were nowhere first race of the season. No team, just because you've got a name behind you that might have some pedigree, you're never guaranteed anything in this sport, especially now with the cost cap as well. Because that's the thing, you could afford, if you're a Mercedes, a Ferrari, a Red Bull, to make a few mistakes. We made a few too many front wings that we don't actually end up needing, using, whatever. You can afford to make those mistakes, and you've got the money. You can just plug that hole with money. Now you can't do that. So also there is more to lose, arguably, for these bigger teams like Ferrari, where they're used to running very bloated operations. They're not used to running it lean like an Alpine.
Money is no object.
An Aston Martin.
Money was no object at Ferrari. They had plenty of it. It was just about the culture and the creativity. And I feel like under Binotto, because it was, this started way before he was even team principal. He was head of the, the design office somewhere around 2016, 2017. And that's when Ferrari kind of kicked on.
Yeah.
With him now gone, is that still going to continue? Are they still going to have big, bold ideas? Because the 2022 car, it was kind of a lot different to all of the other ones. Everyone's kind of leaning more towards Red Bull. But when you look at the Red Bull, the Ferrari, the Mercedes, everyone's got something different. And I really like that. And I just hope that Ferrari still have that creativity and expression, because that's when the best innovations come from. And will they still have that when Binotto is not there? I think that's going to be very important for the next team principal to allow the design department in a cost cap era to still have that freedom of expression. So that's going to be big as well, because the car is the thing that's going to win in the championship.
Do you think that's going to last though? Because you got to think over time that there will be a best approach, and obviously it's most visually obvious with the side pods, but also even front wings. You look at Aston Martin's front wing, looks totally different to Ferrari's. There's a lot of different approaches, but you've got to think over time that the designs will
going to converge. Yeah,
you would think so, and then it's very much okay. Which approach? Is it this Mercedes approach that we still don't really know what they're going to do next year? Are they going to go down more of Red Bull route? Or is it going to be this Ferrari big, scoop side pods? I mean, they look nicer than the Red Bull ones, so I'd like it to.
I know Ferrari didn't win the championship, but that car, it's won my heart.
Beautiful.
I mean, the
They
F1
nailed
75, absolutely beautiful car. Hopefully another banger for 2023, please. But do you know what? I think actually I'll talk about 2021 in terms of the previous generation. Even though the Mercedes was the dominant car, most of the teams actually went the Red Bull route with the high rake. Like Mercedes was one of the very few teams that was kind of ran the lower, the lower rake. So it's not always that, people copy the quickest car. Sometimes it's just what their design office is saying perhaps is
what you
better.
understand the most as well.
Exactly.
I think understanding, like, obviously there was all the talk of Aston Martin copying Red Bull at the start of the season, where actually it turns out that Aston actually had that design in the works for a long time. And they clearly did understand that new sidepod design because their performance just went up. Like as Alfa Romeo and Haas stumbled, Aston Martin just kept picking up points finishes, and they took it to the wire. And it's like,
I think Aston Martin, if Stroll did a better job, they would have closed the deal with Alpha.
100%. Come on, then, surely. I mean, if Stroll doesn't bottle those opportunities, where running in, like Austin running in the points before he drives into, takes Alonso out.
So looking ahead to 2023, because it's never as bad as it seems. Like, again, Ferrari have done what I've always said. Ferrari have the most difficult thing right. They've got a race-winning car. Like, this is an amazing platform. You've got Leclerc and Sainz. You've got two really good drivers. It's never as bad as you think it is.
Yep.
And yet, everyone I've spoken to, and even you, everyone is... I'm not seeing a single person say Ferrari next year are going to be the ones to get it right. They're not only going to stay ahead of Mercedes, but they're also going to beat Red Bull.
Yeah.
If anything, people are saying... I think, people are saying that Mercedes are the team that are going to make the biggest jump up and even overtake Ferrari. I know F1 Twitter is not always the best kind of, place to take opinion from, but the general feeling is that Ferrari are looking at the moment like third best, and we don't know what's going to happen, but just the feeling of everyone and the confidence is that Mercedes and Red Bull are going to be the two better teams next year.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it in 2022. You can create a great car, but if you don't manage the car, manage the drivers, and I think they manage the drivers fine, but manage the opportunities, manage the races properly, it doesn't matter how good your car is. And it's just like Ferrari gives us no reason to be confident. You look at the consistent failure year after year after year, haven't won a constructor since 2008, haven't won a driver since 2007, have so often fallen foul because of things outside of the car performance. And even you look at when Fernando ran Seb so close in 2012, that car was subpar. You had a driver that was able to extract it, and arguably the team made up for that somewhat then.
It's quite funny because back in 2012, operationally, Ferrari were doing a decent job with what they had in terms of extracting the maximum out of that car.
Yeah,
it just
exactly.
wasn't quite on the level of Red Bull for Fernando.
They had the opposite issue, almost.
It's interesting. So it's never, that's what I'm saying, it's never, I don't want this to kind of be all doom and gloom because I think Ferrari have so many key things right. They have so many great things at that team. They have a great driver. I do think they have a good car. It's just, I think about in terms of what is this team principle going to bring? How are they going to galvanize the troops and build a brand new culture if they feel like what's happened in the past and in 2022 perhaps hasn't yielded the results, or even, the car hasn't improved. The car got worse over the course of the season, especially during the summer break. Red Bull brought something in that summer break that just put them on a different level, and Ferrari weren't able to keep up.
So who's going to take over then?
I mean, I definitely don't even have a name, and that's the difficult thing. But I think the problem for me is just that I think there's a bigger cultural issue in terms of whoever it's going to be. You can't just get a patsy in terms of a random, a good operator of a team. You need someone who's going to have that power, who's going to have that confidence that I'm not just going to have the board kind of sack me off in 2 years. And, if they lose it, if they get a bit shaky, then my position is shaky. And look, the drivers now have so much influence that they could sack me. So I think it's got to be someone that actually has the power, but I have no clue who that is because Ferrari is such a big organization now, a traded company, of course, as well. So I almost think that they're too commercial to the point where I think people like Elkan almost need to step back a little bit. He can be in charge of Ferrari, the road car business, no problem, in the same way that there's people in charge of Red Bull, but they need to bring in someone who is almost a Christian Horner, someone who's in charge of Scuderia Ferrari. Still, of course, has a boss and still talks, to the big people at Ferrari, but makes the final decisions and has the overall power of that team. But it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, I'm not
And I'm not buzzing with Frederic Vasseur. He's only going to be an operator. He's not going to... If he has a shaky 2023, the board are going to be going.
This is the thing, right? I don't think there's anyone, even if Christian Horner, Total Wolff are available, even if that was realistically a thing, I still don't think I would feel massively confident for all the reasons, like in terms of there does seem to be this micromanaging from above where they're not given the full reins, and you just can't, like, this isn't, with this kind of job, you need to really give that responsibility to a sole individual and let them run with it and believe in their vision. And maybe it will work, maybe it won't. But like, you need to do that.
Too big for that, though.
But again, like with the Braun Todd era, and to be honest, I don't know back then what exactly the management structure above was. But I feel
for the most part, it was, I think, Luca de Montezemolo running everything. It was just him running kind of Ferrari.
Yeah.
But Jean Todt was the managing director, or like not just the team principal, but he was the guy calling the shots for the most part. So, but handing over that power is not always easier, And they do have, again, they now have shareholders to actually answer to. Like the performance of the race team is going to affect the performance of the brand.
Well, that's their sole marketing activity, isn't it? That's literally it, Ferrari, for F1.
They're such a unique team where they don't have advertising. You see Mercedes, for example, plastered on some football kits and even stadiums. Ferrari don't even bother with that.
No.
Their marketing is their prestige, their race team, and their exclusivity.
And that's the thing as well, yeah. That they have such a brand identity that's so kind of almost like, it's very quite smug, quite kind of, you need to get on a waiting list to buy a Ferrari. You're not guaranteed. Like, they have to vet you before you can buy a brand new. Like,
you have to buy a lot of cheaper Ferraris before you get the big exciting stuff, or the opportunity to spend your X amount of money.
And look, they're entitled to do that. They're their own company. They're entitled to do that, and I get there's value that people see in that. But when it comes to running a race team, a sports team, effectively, I do wonder if part of that over management maybe reflects on the racing side of the business as well.
I think and I just talk about pressure again, because I'm not saying Binotto, I'm not trying to defend Binotto too much, because he made mistakes. He didn't do a good job this year.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes, yes, there was progress, but in Formula One, and I think about the BMW era, they had 1 year to really get it right in 2008 when they had a good enough car. And for them, it was going to be like, this is just a stepping year. 2009 is going to be the big one for us. But sometimes you just have that 1 year and you need to capture that. And he didn't. So he did make mistakes. It didn't get better. I do think he did a lot of things right. But yeah, it's difficult with Ferrari. Again, to be positive, not so that's not all doom and gloom, it's never as bad as you think it is. All you need is just a really good car, and hopefully, for the technical department to learn from some of the mistakes that perhaps they made. You've still got two drivers, and perhaps someone who comes in just as a team principal, like an Andreas Seidel, or someone that's just in charge of the race team and doesn't have too much say apart from that. Maybe they can get the job done if they build the right culture and have the right power and kind of earn that trust from the board where they can have that power. But I mean, we're gonna wait and see, aren't we?
But Tifosi deserve better. You deserve better, Tifosi.
Either way, as I've always said with Ferrari, good or bad, it's box office. We're gonna find out. It's gonna be content. It's gonna be
box
office, because we absolutely love it. But yeah, thank you for watching this kind of little Ferrari special. A little bit off the cuff, to be fair. But again, just before this video, we recorded another episode of the Last Lap podcast. So make sure to check that out. I'll have that link whenever that's out at the very top of the description. Tomo, thank you very much. We need to make this a bit more regular. I mean,
we do.
Seeing you in person, unbelievable, mate.
We always have good.
Trim's even worse in person.
Oh, thank you. Wow, I was so complimentary.
I know. I mean, sometimes you've got a level.
How dare you? No, I'm almost 30, so I've accepted my the fall off, mate. No, it's a pleasure to be on, mate, and it's always. I feel like we always have good F1 chat. We could just go on for ages. Like whenever we see each other socially, we're just chatting about F1.
Exactly. There's probably about 1 million people trying to use the stream. So yeah, we've got to end it soon. But yeah, thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next one.